Good afternoon, everyone. Dr. Binder, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Department of English, I, Kanchan Bagul, would like to welcome you all for the first session of Day 4 of the one-week faculty development program on literary theory and criticism, organized by the Department of English, KTHM College, under STRIDE, Component 1, Research and Capacity Building, between 23rd and 20th August 2021. I'm very happy to tell you all that today we have with us Honorable Professor Dr. Kamalakar Bhat, the resource person for this session. We also have with us respected Head of the Department, Professor Dr. Sharad Binnor, a mentor, Dr. Yogesh Gangude, and all the members of organizing committee. And along with, we have near about more than 117 participants. Friends, cultural studies is a field of theoretically, politically, and empirically engaged cultural analysis that concentrates upon the political dynamics of contemporary culture, its historical foundations defining threats, conflicts, and contingencies. For example, from the perspective of cultural studies, things like race, gender, or disability don't really exist, but they are instead concepts or beliefs that people have created in order to organize their cultures or societies. To strengthen our understanding of cultural studies, we have amongst us a renowned speaker, author, Professor Dr. Kamalakar Bhat. It's honor and privilege for me to introduce such an eminent person. He has been teaching since 1993. He has enriched the lives of many undergraduate, postgraduate, and MPhil students with his knowledge. He has guided 7 students for PhD. He is also very active in various professional training programs. I'm very happy to share that he has more than 17 research publications, 7 book chapters, and 4 books as a single author to his credit. He has translated 11 literary works into English and 4 into Kannada. Considering his in-depth knowledge, he has been invited as a resource person more than 60 times so far at various colleges and universities. He has completed 3 research projects funded by University Grant Commission and BCUD, Savitribai Phule Pune University. I would also like to tell that he has been appointed as member BOS in English for Symbiosis College of Arts Pune, member Local Inquiry Committee of SPPU of Pravara Rural Education Society's Arts, Commerce, Science and Computer Science College Ashvi, Sangamner, member of the selection panel as subject expert as Sau Sushila Tai Kale Arts, Commerce and Science College, Gautam Nagar, member of the selection panel as subject expert at KG Somaiya Arts, Commerce, Science College, Kopargaon. He has also played a vital role as a member, BOS in English, for Ferguson College, Pune, member of the selection panel as subject expert at MS Kakade College, Someshwar Nagar. Along with this, he has also been appointed as member of panel to design a course specifically for teachers, which is English for Teachers for UGC, HRDC, SPPU. Such an eminent and resourceful person is amongst us today to guide us on cultural studies. I request Dr. Bhat to guide us. Over to you, Bhat, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank the principal of KTHM College and the head of the Department of English, Professor Binno, for giving me this opportunity to share my ideas with you today. My topic for today's presentation is cultural studies, an area of relatively recent interest, but widely known. Though truly the beginning of cultural studies goes back to 19th century, to Matthew Arnold, to be specific, from whom the modernist critics such as Eliot and Lewis were inspired, what we today identify as cultural studies in the institutional sense was launched by the Birmingham School, as I'm sure all of you are aware. It's a broadly Marxist approach, and it gradually came under the influence of French post-structuralism. Primarily, forgive me for repeating something so well known, cultural studies expands the object of literary criticism to include not only textuality, but also diverse phenomena that participate in its production, distribution, and consumption. For example, new historicism asserts that literary studies should be interested in not only textuality, but also historicity of texts. Or postcolonialism focuses on political economy of textual practices. Of course, this much and more is known to all of you. If I try to describe what cultural studies is, it will perhaps be redundant. Further, merely explaining the field will be a superficial engagement. It will serve no one's academic purpose. Therefore, my attempt will be to focus on something concrete and then try to show how that theoretical approach may be used in literary studies. I have chosen to focus on a small corner of cultural studies, if I say so, called memory studies. More specifically, cultural memory studies. First, I will try to describe the salient features of the field of memory studies. Then I will elaborate on the relevance of memory to literary studies. And thirdly, I will try to illustrate the usefulness of this method by using a few conceptual tools of to discuss some literary texts. My hope is that the field itself may be of interest to you, but in all likelihood, the field. Okay. So my hope is that the field may be of interest to you, but since your academic work may already have taken a particular course, my hope in that case is that this discussion will have an analogical utility to your work, at least to some of your work. I welcome questions, comments, and interventions from you any time of lecture, but because asking through the audio of this platform may create a bit of a technical problem, either ask in the chat box or use the hand raise icon to intervene. I will try to finish my lecture in less than an hour so that we can have a detailed discussion. Okay, now let me turn to memory studies. Memory is as an object of academic inquiry is of a very recent extract, in fact. It has associations with an approach to historiography that believes in the need to step beyond the usual sources in our understanding of the past. It has also been suggested that studying memory is an alternative approach to studying history, so as to avoid the official nature of history, which insists on public records. In a sense, memory studies seems to create space for those accounts of past that are left out of history. Thus, typically, the field of memory studies includes studies of glossed over accounts of traumatic events as experienced by the victims, exploitation or oppression by dominant communities on nations, events that are denied historical recognition, etc. It includes studies of such phenomena as social, collective, or public memory, which examine not only the past but also the very process of such remembering. These concepts set up a contrast with notions of individual or personal memory by asserting that though it is an individual who remembers, the trigger for remembering as well as as the content and function of that memory are public in nature. Memory studies does not normally show much interest in individual memory, though it is interested in why and how individuals engage in remembering the past. In the last 3 decades, there have been a rush of activities within this area, and memory studies has emerged as an important interdisciplinary approach within the larger field of cultural studies. Memory studies aims at understanding social practices of remembering and the socio-cultural processes that facilitate the negotiation of the past that contribute to shaping collective identities and impacts social action. It is common to trace the origins of memory studies to the scholarship on collective memory produced by Morris Hobwax in his book on collective memory. It was published in 1925. Hobwax's argument, in a nutshell, is that individuals' memory is generated through interactions with larger society. The work of Hobwax basically is sociological and focused on categories such as family and class. He argues that social processes greatly influence our memories of our own lifetimes, and further that they also strongly impact a society's common memories of the past. Therefore, shared memories become crucial for the identity of communities, be it families, religion, or social classes. We have several examples for such. Say, for example, within families, we have what we call as heirlooms in the form of inherited, items of jewelry, maybe, or other, items, or sometimes certain responsibilities in the society, etc. Similarly, a whole nation may have similar shared memories, which becomes crucial for that nation, and we kind of celebrate such things, isn't it? So, in the life of a society, in the life of a family, in the life of a whole nation, etc., memories play a role in defining that society, in defining that family, in defining that nation. And memory is, in fact, used in order to forge that identity, and not only just forge the identity, to even sustain that identity. So, Hobwax's insights have been developed by scholars to show that the way we remember is related to the social discourses and practices. One such is social memory, which focuses on the social context of memory and examines how individuals recall the past in relation to prevalent narratives as forms of commemoration. The best illustration for this in our country is the commemoration of historical figures by naming roads or institutes or airports, universities, etc. Isn't it? You know, we have, for example, the names of Shivaji, Mahatma Gandhi, that have been given to innumerable entities. Let us take, for example, the protracted claims and counterclaims to the memory of Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, Subhash Chandra Bose, or even Bhagat Singh. The issue here is not whose claim is right or who is the rightful claimant, etc. Those are not the issue here. Because, you know, I mean, those issues are obviously related to party politics, which is of very little interest. What is at issue here is how claims made on these historical figures through various memorial media, you know, texts and monuments, films, etc., over a period of time, and it makes for an interesting study in the changing narratives that are attached to past phenomena. It also reminds us that in memorial practices, truths of the past, the so-called true history or facts, are never the issue. Memorial practices have more to do with appropriations of the past for the present purposes, and thus fictional or imaginary elements may be a part of these appropriations. In this sense, memorial practices narrativize or fictionalize past invariably. Hence, such much of the memory studies takes the social constructionist approach. That is, in society, the belief that in society, truth and facts don't exist by themselves. Social phenomena are all constructions. Isn't it? And this is also something that we know cultural studies and most of the post-structuralist, approaches have in common. They are all constructionist approaches, starting with structures. Another point about social memory, stressed in memory studies, is that amnesia is as much a part of this social phenomena of remembering as memory. What a particular society or sections of society remembers involves also something that is forgotten, but also that the same society or section of society may, in the course of time, alter the content of its memory. What it remembers is not permanent, it changes. Thus, memory studies is interested in examining this entire phenomena of remembering and forgetting, all of which have a social, political, and historical context. Let me quote Anne Rigney, who has argued, and I quote, "Behind this view of memorial dynamics is the idea that being remembered is more than a matter of being recorded in what is stored in an archive is merely a latent form of memory. And as long as no one pays any attention to an account of the past, it is effectively forgotten. Instead, memories are dependent on their being recalled in various media by later generations who find them meaningful for the time being, who may even find it their duty alive, but whose descendants may nevertheless proceed to forget them again. So, this is an important point that we can take forward. Another approach in memory studies focuses on what's called as popular memory and is influenced by the work done at Birmingham Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies, with which cultural studies is very closely associated with, and the major theoreticians of cultural studies also are from this center, such as Stuart Hall. So this approach explores popular memory, especially in the form of oral history. Approaches associated with this outlook question the hegemonic narratives and aim to record the memories of subordinate groups in society. You will easily remember the work done by subaltern studies as exemplified this. Think of, just a second. Think of Shahid Amin's book, Event, Metaphor, Memory, which builds an alternative history of the Chaura Chauri event based on the family lore, folk songs, and other such non-historical resources of the subalterns. The interesting feature of this, as famously exemplified by the work done by Subaltern Studies Collective, is that in exploring popular memory, history steps out from the exalted halls of rational discourses and tries to construct from fictional narratives. I must point to the interesting phenomena of folk songs, such as povadas or other narrative songs and other performance narrative songs that celebrate public figures of the past. Very often, what history memorialized and what is memorialized by the folk songs are very different. We must remember that the earliest celebratory accounts of Shivaji are found not in history books, but in povadas in Karnataka. There was a regional ruler in the Chitradurga area called Madakari Nayak, who has been extolled as a brave commander and ruler, but the folk songs of the region are silent on it, indicating that people's memory of the same ruler is quite different. Similarly, if we take the example of Tipu Sultan, in different regions in South, the accounts given by folk narratives about Tipu Sultan vary. Some celebrate him, some denigrate, reminding us that rulers ultimately can be good to some and bad to some others. So, an important development of Hubwalk's ideas is undertaken by Alida and John Aspley, who introduced the concept of cultural memory. According to them, the sense of belongingness to a distinct society or cultural community is obtained by an individual across generations through socialization and customs. Cultural memory for them refers to the collective knowledge obtained through customs, practices, objects, rituals, and so on. The everyday activities within communities that guides the individuals to repeat past social practices over generations. Jan Asman defines the concept of cultural memory as being distinct from the everyday memory, which they term as communicative. Cultural memory has its fixed point. Its horizon does not change with the passing of time. These fixed points are faithful events of the past, whose memory is maintained through cultural formations such as texts and rites and monuments, and institutional commemorations such as recitation and observance, etc. Now, communicative memory, according to them, does not have a cultural character and relates to the intimate, whereas cultural memory refers to that which is remote from the everyday memory, refers back in time, beyond personal familiarity. Communicative memory is closely related to Hobsbawm's understanding of collective memory. Its temporal framework is limited, just a couple of generations, spanning at best 100 years, and it relies on everyday communications. By definition, it is closely connected to those familiar with the event itself. Whereas cultural memory refers to events from distant past, not fed by living memory. Because memory of past events is sustained through cultural formations or through forms of commemoration. Epics are a good example of culture. Memories of mythical characters have been turned into everyday practices, such as naming, religious rituals, festivals, etc. Take the example of the legend of Bali, a king famed to have done good to farmers. In parts of South India, Bali is celebrated in a variety of festivals. Onam in Kerala, Diwali in Karnataka. Basavanna is a historical figure from 12th century Karnataka, region that belongs to Karnataka now. A leader of a group of radicals who sought to defy social hierarchy, applying the notion of oneness of all humans in front of God. Today, Basavanna is a very important figure in a number of social registers of memory, which includes caste register as well as caste opposing register, spiritual register as well as secular and radical registers. Basavanna's composition, called vachanas, too are appropriated in support of the specific forms of memorializing. So across these diverse formulations in memory studies, the common element is the view of the intersection between culture and memory at social and individual levels. Practice of remembering or the meaning of memory is seen in terms of its constructiveness. Memory is also seen as mediated by cultural, social, political, and media apparatus. The focus on constructiveness and mediation calls our attention to the narrative dimension. Hence, memory studies addresses how memory is designed as an access to narratives. This also would lead us into the relation between memory and literature. Literature is one of the memorial media, mnemotechnic as it is sometimes called, through which societies construct, preserve, and recollect their past. Now, let me turn to the relevance of memory in literature studies, in literary studies. Here, my attempt first is to show the connections between memory and literature, thus advocating the research potential in memory studies. Then, in the third part of the lecture, I will try to illustrate it by way of discussing some conceptual tools within memory studies. Okay. So, if history is the life lived, cultural memory is what lives on. One is an image of the completed, the other of the continued. Cultural memory is an encoding of practices in repeatable forms, whether direct or indirect, material or immaterial. It's a group phenomenon, even though it is embodied by and in the individuals. Importantly, cultural memory is in the form of representations. Memory may be preserved, maintained, and communicated in any society through various types of media, customs, festivals, statues, public buildings, institutes, and texts. Take for example our secular forms of memory. Say, 15th August. We unfurl the national flag. It's a form of remembering, isn't it? And it's also a form of asserting that through this remembering, we are kind of, reasserting our connectedness. And there are many things that go with it. There are certain ways in which it is celebrated all across India. There are certain do's and don'ts associated with it. So, in this manner, all across India, we have days like 15th August or 26th January that get celebrated, and certain things are remembered on those days. So, this is how, even in the secular terrain, we have the same procedure as in other terrains, in cultural terrains such as religious and social kind of practices. So, but we must remember that these media are deployed as part of the socio-political contingencies. Recent controversy, take for example the recent controversy about the renaming of Khel Ratna awards, which reminds us about the complexity of public. There can be a conflict as to which memory is more important, and sometimes people, in the case of the Khel Ratna award, that is what a lot of people kept discussing. But as far as memory studies point of view is concerned, that is not the issue. The issue is, how something like, what memory becomes important and how it has to be commemorated. These are decisions taken in the present for the purposes of the present. Memory whether it relates to person X or person Y. That in itself is those persons or their contributions. That is a separate issue. In practices of memory, it is the socio-political contingencies of the present that, in fact, contributes to this. That, in fact, becomes important. Now, literary texts are an important space to discover memories of the past, be it autobiographies or other genres, be it communicative memory, social memory, popular memory, or cultural. Literary texts engage in preserving and communicating memory, revising and rememorializing them, or attempting to change and reconfigure them. Now, I draw on Earle and Nunning, whose work on cultural memory and narratives is very useful. According to Earle and Nunning, the relation between literature and memory can be systematized as literature's memory so as systematized as in three respects: literature's memory, memory in literature, and literature as a medium of memory. First, let's look at what Earle and Nunning mean by literature's memory. See, literary works provide an important bridge between generations. Recollecting texts composed or written in earlier periods is an integral part of cultural remembrance. Literature establishes a memory of its own in the form of intertextual relations that give a new cultural life to old texts. The way in which literature's internal memory, as one may call it, operates, or how memory operates in constituting literature, has three dimensions. First of all, literary genres. Now, literary genres represent a form of memory internal to literature, but that continues for long periods of time. Considering that epics go back to thousands of years before AD, and even today it's an active genre, we understand how literary memory is very, very long. Genres represent literature as primarily mnemotechnic. Remember that when you write a literary, you are operating within a form, and that form may be old, sometimes very old. You are always writing in a form already used, thus continuing something into it. A lyric, for example, goes back thousands of years, and cultures have retained these forms and have nurtured. In fact, it is interesting to note here I find it very interesting that genres appear to be very rigid, a memorial technique going back in time, but it is also true that they are very flexible and also travel a lot. They are open to receive flesh, blood, and don new clothes, as it were. Isn't it? That's how we have some literary genres, traveling across not only time, but also space. So you have ghazals being written in Europe or in America, and we have European or other from other continents genres from there being magical realism, for example, imported from somewhere in novel form is imported. Sonnet writing is taken from Elizabeth. So, etc. So this goes on. In fact, even within Europe, we see how from ancient periods, forms of literary forms have traveled from ancient periods as well. Now, second aspect is retelling of literary texts, which is another kind of internal memory of literature. It represents not only memory but also a form of intertextuality. During the neoclassical period, it was called imitation, in fact. For example, Johnson's poem, London, is an imitation of Juvenal's third satire, the Latin Roman writer. It means that it was an altered rendering. That's what it meant in the neoclassical period, even including some original lines that are translated. Similar literary phenomena also informs the pre-modern literature in India. When in every Indian languages, stories from Ramayana and Mahabharata and many other, in fact, ancient texts were pre-written. Thirdly, the internal memory of literature also covers the afterlife of texts in the form of translations. So, in the form of translations, also this internal memory works. Literary texts circulate across space as well as time through translations, and if we imagine how much Aesop's fables have traveled across languages, we realize how the literary phenomena is sustained through translation. You may even think of translation into other media, films or game these days, isn't it? So, or even within literary forms, there have been translations from one literary genre to another literary genre, from, for example, novel to drama, etc., happening. So all these forms of literary memory include commemoration, celebration, as well as contestation. It's not only that, memory is always in order to celebrate the memory, literary texts are written only by celebrating the memory of a past event or a past individual or some past practice. No, there is commemoration, but there are contestations as well. Thus, for example, we have translated texts that commemorate, such as Daneshwari. We have retellings that celebrate, such as Vishal Bharadwaj's Shakespeare renderings, or retellings that contest, such as, for example, Dryden's versions of Shakespeare. We can also view many feminist versions of folk tales and Ramayana and such other key texts also as retellings that involve a form of contestation. I can take another example here of contestation at the level of genre. This is Raja Rao's 1938 novel, Kantapura. Although it is called a novel, at least a section of it aims to be different from the English or European model of novel writing known at the time. Raja Rao uses the preface to call our attention to the style in which novel is written and the rationale. He says, and I quote, "The telling has not been easy. One has to convey in a language that is not one's own the spirit that is one's own." Unquote. So Kantapura deviates from the Englishness of the English language and also of the genre of the stylistic feature of this needs to be viewed not only as difference in relation to novelistic discourse, but also as a deployment of cultural memory of the native culture, especially in relation to two aspects: the narrative style or technique, which differs from the dominant Western novelistic style of its time, and what it employs as the preface describes, the Indian narrative style. Secondly, the use of a long winding sentence structure, which imitates the regional style. Sometimes same sentence running into more than a page. So that kind of generic experimentation is a form of contestation of the genre by deploying cultural memory. So you are bringing in genre from one's own culture into a form of literature which is brought into that culture, isn't it? So this is something that we see, and later on I'm going to discuss some of the other experiments in this respect by calling it a reflexive approach, but that will come a little later. Now, such acts of remembrance contribute in a very specific manner to the ongoing production and reproduction of cultural memory, as well as to our reflection on that. Exploration of the internal memory of literature is carried out in academic research under the rubric of influence studies or genre studies or comparative literature. New possibilities open up if we approach through the lens of memory studies. Now, let us look at the second link between literature and memory that I have mentioned above, which is memory in literature. The representation of memory in literary texts functions at various levels. Genre, techniques, motive, or even characters. Autobiography as a memory genre raises distinct questions about the status of memory and forgetting that is textualized. We can go into some of these questions in the discussion. But we also have a type of writing in novel that too is autobiography. The most obvious example being Proust's Remembrance of Things Past, or James Joyce's Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, or D.H. Lawrence's Sons and Lovers, etc. Here also, the issue of memory becomes complicated as fictional elements enter in. But we need not think that the fictionality of memory in autobiography and autobiographical novel are very different. Hayden White, in fact, has shown how every narrative, whether it is autobiography, biography, autobiographical fiction, or just fiction, science fiction, or even history books, every narrative is subject to fictionality at diverse levels. Memory also appears as a technique in literature, such as stream of consciousness. It's important to remember here that though often the memory projected in literary texts is personal, they symbolically or metonymically represent collective memory. For example, while we read D.H. Lawrence's novels, say Sons and Letters or Sons and Lovers or The Rainbow, taking its autobiographical elements into account at another level, some of the memory also reflect the transformations that the community is under. So Lawrence's novels not only are operating at the personal memory level, they're also operating at the level of the collective memory, which is marking the transformations taking place as the landscape, the industrialization is changing the landscape of countryside. So another very important aspect is how the very process of literary production refers to the act of remembering, isn't it? Because we can't think of a story without that story being remembered. We have a traditional form of story. The beginning of the story itself is once upon a time, which itself indicates, narratology tells us a lot about this. The whole idea of remembering. I think I don't need to go beyond the widely known interpretation of Wordsworth's poem Daffodils to explain this. Not only in narratives, but even in a lyric poem like Daffodil, the whole poem is very often seen as giving us, how literary production takes place through the mediation of memory. Many texts, in fact, self-consciously reflect on their production and the role of memory in it. Consider the opening of Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness or that of Wuthering Heights. If we take the example of Rushdie's Midnight Children, we have something interesting going on there, because we notice that such a reflection on memory is used even to project the narrator as unreliable. Amitav Ghosh's Shadowlands also reflects on the act of remembering and also of its importance. Now, let me turn to the third link between literature and memory. Focus on literature as a medium of memory. Basically, where something remembered becomes the content of literature. Here again, works of literature help produce collective memories by recollecting the past in the form of narratives. The obvious forms of memory that we find constituting literary works are personal memory, historical events, identity narratives, etc. For example, we have numerous novels recounting various events related to India's freedom struggle. At the level of events, we have a novelistic discourse called partition novel. At the level of characters, we have a variety of Gandhi novels, reinventing the historical Gandhi in many forms. We may briefly consider Indian historical novel as it emerged in 19th and 20th century to understand, how there are certain contingent, configuration of memory. We notice that a number of novels of this period, a number of novels written during this period, which are themed on history or which have memory as their content, they attempt to reconstruct past memory such as that of Rana Pratap, Shivaji, and others in such a way as to portray the glorious heritage of India and its present economy. Examples that come to my mind are the Gujarati novel Karan Ghelo or the Malayalam novel Martanda Verma, and in fact, even in Indian English novels, there are quite a few examples that immediately I can't recall, but in Indian English novel, in the history of Indian English novel, we learn about. Now, during this period, even social memory deployed. The story is fictional, but social practices are historical. That also tended to follow this logic of past glory and present decadence. Now, over and above the works that have memory as the plot line, literary works may reveal cultural memory at micro levels and even metonymic. For example, literary works may reveal food habits, recipes, clothing practices, economic structures, farming practices, etc. Isn't it? And these may reveal to us aspects of the society being depicted. This is an archaeological recuperation of memory. When we read, for example, Keats's Grecian urn, Ode to Grecian urn, we learn something about the society in which the urn was created, and that is the reason why Keats calls it a historian. In Kantapura's early pages, we have a description of the trade that is the backbone of that village, but not by describing trade per se, but merely in the form of a description of the carts that plied to and from Kantapura. Keats's novel Disgrace, published in 1999, engages with South African post-apartheid discourses about truth and reconciliation. In this sense, it provides a mimesis of cultural memory in the form of a fictional story about a man who refuses to confess and be forgiven for things done in the past. By offering a parallel fictional story focused on an individual and his private life, Keats's novel reflects critically on the construction of cultural memory in society at large. We can also reconstruct some aspects of cultural memory metonymically. Experiences of one character or a family or whole group may lead us to metonymically understand the social and economic dimensions of that society. It's a kind of symptomatic reading. If we take Shakespeare's King Lear, it will be clear. A Marxist reading of the play King Lear interprets Shakespeare as representing the feudal order, which is under attack by the newly emerging mercantile, the pre-capitalist mercantile order represented by Goneril, Reagan, and their husbands, as against Cordelia and her husband, King of France, who are on the side of the feudal system. This reading takes the plot line symptomatically to represent historical memory and the conflicts there. Though I can't remember the details now, but there are some very interesting readings of novels in the works of Ranjit Guha, Partha Chatterjee, and Deepesh Chakravarti, where they have used, analysis of novels for constructing, historical accounts and theorizing. Now, I turn to, just a second. Okay, now I turn to the third part of this presentation. Here I will take up three conceptual tools for literary analysis as a brief demonstration. They are revivalistic approach, reflexive / rememorialization, and curative approach. Of course, it is tentative and partial, and because of the time restrictions, it's rather brief. Okay. Literature does not have a single pre-given role in memorial dynamics. Nor do literary works have only one cultural afterlife. The same literary work may serve both to confirm and consolidate the sense of a common heritage, and depending on who is doing the reading, to arouse interest in the heritage and experience of other groups. To take the point even further, it is arguable that making uninterested parties interested in the experience of others may be as much a key to the construction of cultural memories as the supposedly spontaneous identification with the experiences of one's family or the experiences of one the ethnic group with which one usually identifies. Literary works, by virtue of their poetic and fictional properties, may have a distinctive role to play in reawakening eroded memories in later generations. Thus, one of the dynamics of literary configuration of memory is to revive that which is lost or forgotten. In the context of colonized societies or oppressed societies, this particular function of revival of memory takes a political urgency. I call this revivalistic approach, and that is my first conceptual tool. Memory deployed for revivalistic purposes. Memory as nostalgia. In some cases, the urge for revival is productive. In some, it may be regressive. Some of this may even reveal an element of nostalgia for the past, where one is kind of wanting to recuperate that past as such, which they seek to re-establish. They hope to re-establish it. So in that sense, it is nostalgic. I want to give a couple of examples to clarify what I mean. Take Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. It's a novel that was written explicitly to counter the colonial representations of Africa and its traditions. Achebe in this novel wants to not only show the colonizing culture's violence, but also to assert that his own culture has its merits, as against how the colonial culture had represented the African societies. In fact, we can even read this novel, Things Fall Apart, against Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, which had portrayed Africa as not only a dark, not only a dark continent, but also as dumb in the sense of having no voice. Achebe's novel, thus may be seen as deploying cultural memory of Africans, specifically, of course, that of the Swahili tribe of Nigeria, as that is the locale, as a form of asserting identity and kind of capturing the initiative to self-representation. This is a kind of a I would say, progressive and productive way of revivalistic or nostalgic memory. Of course, Things Fall Apart is not merely revivalistic. It does show the limitations of the Swahili tribe, the cultural memory of Swahili tribe as well. Let me take another example to point out how the revivalistic approach can be regressive and be merely a nostalgia for the past. This time, I want to turn to Rama Mehta's novel, Inside the Haveli. It is a good example of the deployment of cultural memory in the nostalgic mode. As indicated by the title itself, it is the Haveli lifestyle that is invoked in the narrative. The novel richly portrays the cultural memory of the Haveli dwellers as it has existed for a long time. I see the deployment of cultural memory of the Haveli dwellers as in this novel as revivalistic, because we see a nostalgia for the Haveli life, which is defended in the novel by presenting it as constituting a more valuable way of life. We see this also in the way Malgudi is constructed by R.K. Narayan in his fictional works, and in many other novels, no doubt. The deployment of cultural memory inside Haveli may be seen through the theme of tradition and modernity, and it is interesting to see how this stages nation. There are two temporal and spatial categories in the novel. One representing the traditional aristocracy inhabiting the Haveli, and the other representing the world outside it, which is integrated into nature. The novel then goes on to valorize the former, defending its socio-cultural practices by glossing over the inherent oppressiveness. Isn't it? Contrary to its initial claim of a common bond among the inhabitants of the old city of Udaipur, the novel reveals processes of othering within the old city based on class and gender. It ends up contesting the horizontal life affected by nation on behalf of the aristocracy. The defense of which is made in the novel by its tradition. The novel, however, effectually silences the dissent of class by portraying the generosity of the aristocracy. Thus, in this novel, contestation of nation as a modern collectivity is undertaken from the point of view of aristocratic memory. It deploys the thematic smoke screen of the conflict between tradition and modernity only to naturalize the perpetuation of patriarchal hierarchy. The link between literature and memory, on the one hand, refers to non-referential content of textual material that portray explicitly or implicitly the operations of. On the other hand, this link can also refer to the narratives that individuals or communities create about their past as part of their construction of identity. In this particular role, there is, to the link between literature and memory, a fictional element, as they tend to be imaginative reconstructions of the past from within their current context. The narrator, assessing the past, is also involved in the act of bringing order into his or her memories, imposing meaning on a slice from the past. So it is in this meaning-making aspect that we realize that memory is never merely a recovery of what is past, but a recreation. In this sense, literature does not only record memory, but also sometimes engages in what I would like to call as a kind of a revising, or reflects, a reflexive action, or even rememorialization. Literary texts may have a role to play in arousing interest in histories which are not one's own, in the history of groups with which one has hitherto not identified. This suggests the importance of seeing literary texts not just as channels for perpetuating certain memorial traditions, but also as the source of new traditions and the means for broadening the horizons of what one considers as one's own heritage. And literature plays a role in transferring memories, not just between individuals belonging to the same community or across, but also across groups. This was presumably what Jeffrey Hartman had in mind when he proposed that the arts and literature in particular serve to remind us that the heritage of the past is pluralistic and diverse. It also alerts us to avoid the pitfalls of identity politics within memory studies. That is, to avoid assuming that all recalls of memory or all instances of remembering takes place only within and for purposes of one's own identity group. In fact, literature gives us many examples of alterity, examples of facing the other, or even in some cases, subjecting oneself. I find U.R. Ananthamurthy's celebrated novel Samskara as an illustration for this kind of facing the other. Now, to extend what Eliot says about the artist writing the whole tradition, one may say that all writings tend to be rewritings of sorts. They directly or indirectly revise and refract upon earlier narratives. Every writing reconfigures memories to renegotiate present socio-political contingencies. So the fact that literary works foreground certain memories while marginalizing others indicates that the role of literature is not just a matter of recalling or recording or even stabilizing, but also of selecting certain memories and preparing them for future, cultural use. Poetic and narrative forms have an important role to play in this process of making memorable, or what I've called as rememorialization. I think the example of the film Padmavat is illustrative here. The afterlife of the event, or even character, as in this case, after a text has memorialized it, says something about the efficacy of literary texts vis-a-vis historical texts in terms of memorializing. We have enough examples in contemporary society to understand how even symbolic characters that appear in narratives are converted into historical or real. This reveals that cultural memory often tends to be taken literally by communities that subscribe to such cultural memory. Now, works like Sadish Alekar's Mahanirvan or Vijay Tendulkar's Kashiram Kochwal deploy cultural memory in interesting ways. And that's precisely what I mean by, reflexive approach, in which there is a certain kind of critique, an internal critique, a kind of a revision, as it were, and a kind of a rememorialization taking place. You'll notice that in Satish Alekar's Mahanirvan, Alekar uses Kirtan form at one level and the absurd drama at another. So what is significant in this schematic is that the play doesn't build up an opposition between tradition and modernity as simple binaries, whereby, as it is done in some cases, whereby, one is preferred over the other. For example, Kirtan being preferred as a native cultural form that needs to be recovered, revived, and continued over absurd drama, or the other way around. Absurd drama as a better cultural form over Kirtan, etc. He doesn't do that. I mean, such a binary approach is not there. But there's a satirical view of both. So therefore, I'm saying there's a kind of an internal critique here. So this may be understood from the fact that both the death rites, which represent tradition in this case, which is what is the primary plot line of Mahabharata, and the modern proscenium drama, which is the, let's say, which is the format that it uses, are dysfunctional. Now, in this play, the protagonist, Paura, is presented as engaging in a commentary on the way his death rites progress. This is done through the adoption of Kirtan. At various points in this play, the characters employ recognizable compositions from Marathi musical tradition. The use of Kirtan and songs from Marathi cultural tradition do not celebrate these in this play, because the central metaphor of death attaches itself to tradition itself, isn't it? The cultural memory in this play consists of the performance of Kirtan, the enactment of death rites, and the interweaved songs. At one level, by employing Kirtan as the basic dramatic form in the play, Alekar brings into modern dramaturgy a traditional performance pattern, let's say, form. But the play refuses to kind of valorize this experiment as a revival of a traditional cultural practice by its satiric treatment. The traditional Kirtans have a moral goal and consist of religious legends. Bhaura's Kirtan in the play significantly lacks any such value. It is reduced to mere incidental entertainment. So the overall effect of this is that rather than reviving a cultural practice, it reworks the dramatic form by combining diverse dramatic elements. Kirtan meets intertextuality, epic theatre, absurd theatre, thus producing a hybrid dramaturgy. In this respect, we see that the deployment of cultural memory is not a nostalgic exercise in this context. It's not a nostalgic exercise, that of reviving, but one of reworking or reconfiguring for new use. We see similar approach even in the works of Vijay Tendulkar. You take Gashiram Kotwal, it has a very, very similar kind of an revision and deployment of Tamasha, for example, or Girish Karnat in his plays such as Hayavadana, or Nagamandala, and Chandrasekhar Kamba, another playwright who uses a very similar technique. And we see all these playwrights using a very similar kind of invocation of the cultural memory, where they don't really prescribe it as such. It's also interesting to look at Arun Kolatkar's Jejuri, in which accumulated memory is invoked, as in the case of Kirtan in Mahanirvan, only to subject it to insignificance. Instead, memorializing new materials of the much memorialized place. So this is something that is very, very interesting about Arun Kolatkar's literature. So artifacts can outlive memories. The durability of text, and Keats's that is the point, in fact, Keats makes in Ode to Grecian Urn, a very good example of literature as a memorial practice. The durability of texts means that it's always possible for certain accounts of the past to be reactivated and appropriated by new groups. Whenever those texts are reread, certain images of the past are at once reactivated and adopted to the new context in which they function. Up to a point, this can be said of all sorts of texts stored in archives. They too may be dusted off, brought into circulation, and become meaningful in new situations, whether it is literary or non-literary. Now, in this context, we can see one more aspect of memory in literature, which I have called as curative approach. This is the third approach that I'll describe, and I'll, I think it's already close to my conclusion. In other words, what I want to say is, by what I mean by curative approach is that some literary texts aim at deploying memory to actively seek to change our certain past history, which is part of change sought in the in the society itself. In fact, these texts may deploy alternative memory or a reconfiguration that does not only revise prevalent memorializations but effect change. We may also consider here how literary texts often deploy memory at the intersection of gender and power. Consider feminist, Dalit, or post-colonial rewritings as examples. In many such texts, there is not only alternative configurations of memory, but a subversion of the value of a prevalent one. Bama's Karukku is a good example. Some of Namdev Desal's early poems to exemplify this. Also recall how Kancha Ilayya talks about the alienation felt by students of oppressed classes with the school textbooks, and how its content, whether drawn from Europe or from India, were not a part of their cultural repertoire at all. And we have many more examples, within the post-colonial literature. That we have many more examples. Kuchi does that. Then there is one another novel. The title I've forgotten, which does it in relation to Wuthering Heights. So, let me kind of conclude what I have been saying. The discussion of memory and literary studies I have so far conducted around three conceptual terms stresses the importance of an interdisciplinary approach, which takes into account the various media, discourses, and cultural spheres through which memories are conveyed and transferred. Secondly, the cultural longevity of this portable monuments that literary texts are shows the importance of a non-linear approach to the evolution of cultural memory, which would allow for different temporalities and for discontinuities within traditions. Thirdly, the complexity of the deployment of memory as literary artifacts points to the need for further elaboration of a poetics of memorability based on the principle that literary form may be constitutive of memory rather than in any simple claim for authentic experience. And this is what text after text illustrates how it is important to remember that literary texts are not merely aiming to represent, aiming to give an authentic expression to a reliable, deployment of memory. It is much more complex than that. Is something that we feel when we read many such novels. So this is my submission to you. I can see that there are yeah. Let me see if there are questions here. If you have questions, you may ask your questions in the form of chat, or I don't know, the host may want to moderate it. I had noticed that somebody had raised their hands. Would anybody want to, somebody who had raised their hands, would you like to now make your point? Okay, so thank you, Professor Binur, and thanks. I also would like to thank all the participants who have been kind to me. And if anybody wants to intervene, you are most welcome. Or else over to Professor Binur.
Excuse me, sir. Thanks, sir.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
If anybody has question, you can write the question in the chat box.
Was a question asked? I couldn't hear it.
Question is asked. Okay, okay.
Can somebody repeat that? I think somebody asked a question, but I can't hear that question. Can a social media platform like Facebook be considered an instance of cultural memory? Well, it's a good question. In fact, work is it's an area. Social media and memory studies is an area that is it's the happening area now, so to say. Yes, any media, all medias are quite often deployed for cultural memory. So even social media, is diversely deployed. But it's interesting also to look into not only social media, which is not very different from texts per se, but even other, digital media, such as, say, for example, game. How game is a very important interactive visual media, and how games also deploy cultural memory is a very, very interesting, area to explore. Yes, social media and digital, platforms as media of memory is definitely an area that is under study now. There is another question, and can you elaborate about the role of memory in disability studies? I would say that memory studies has something very specific to contribute to any specific field. In each field, memory studies opens up opportunities. Yes, even in disability studies, it opens up its own, especially the third kind of the recuperative, the curative approach that I described, definitely is something that I'm sure the disability studies also, has also used. Let me see, there is some other question. What are the major concerns of African American literature with respect to culture? Well, African American literature is very vast. It's perhaps it would be limiting to say its concern is this or that. Definitely, African American literature has dealt with a very wide range of issues related to the social, political, and cultural dimensions of life in America. Also, with respect to the various kinds, the various forms in which African Americans' life world is represented. Okay, memory is a very important part of the African American deployment of culture. If you remember the novel Roots, for example, it's very important. And also remember that today we talk about autobiography, Dalit autobiography and women's autobiography, etc. in India, right? So the origin goes back to the use of autobiography as a very strong, identity narrative in the African American culture. So the use of autobiography in African American culture is also something that we recall here in terms of the place of memory in African American studies. Then is there one more question somewhere? Thank you, sir. Can you please say something about the interlink or interrelation between subaltern studies and cultural studies? Subaltern studies can easily be seen as a form of cultural studies because it shares with the Birmingham School much of their preoccupations, especially the Gramscian use of the notion of subaltern and the whole issue of hegemony, which of course, remember, subaltern studies per se, that group is not very active now because they're not producing new books. But the whole idea of using Gramsci's in India, multiple cultures and multiple practices in India, and therefore, rather than this rather binary kind of an approach that underlies in the concepts of hegemony, we need to kind of bring in the hybrid and multiple discourses which are relevant. So that is something that's happening now. The role of somebody has asked a question on the role of memory in trauma studies. Well, that is a major field. In fact, memory studies was developed to a great extent in Germany, and one of the reasons why memory studies has especially rich in the field of trauma studies is because of that. Because in Germany, in German memory studies context, the focus was on, rather than in the French context. In French context, people like Pierre Renora, whose site memory histories were they focused on not traumas, but more on the cultural and the national dimensions. Whereas in Germany, it did focus on the Holocaust and the Nazi occupation and the oppression by the Nazis, and thus that developed the German memory studies has developed a lot on trauma. Then there is, can cultural memory form a sense of imagined community, especially among diasporas? Yes, not only among diasporas. The whole idea of imagined community, as Benedict Anderson points out, is something that is not limited only to diaspora. Even even those who are not diasporic, who are living in their own let us say geographical native place, even they are imagining. Communities have to be imagined, isn't it? Beyond my village, everything I have to imagine, because one-to-one contact, one-to-one familiarity, one-to-one, let us say, bond can be spatially restricted. You can't have one-to-one relationship with a very large number of population. Therefore, it is possible in one village or in one colony or in one particular urban society, etc., but not beyond a few kilometers of space, people living in a few kilometers of space, or your own area of work, etc. So even thinking of, I belong to Maharashtra, that's also imagined. I mean, there is an act of imagination which is required in order to see this as a bond. Nations, of course, Benedict Anderson has so well taught us how all nations are necessarily, and invariably imagined into being, exist by themselves. So it is not only in the case of diasporas, even in other instances, the issue of imagined community is very much there. And cultural memory, as I have tried to argue throughout my presentation, is always a matter of deploying memory, not as it is per se. I mean, one is not saying that memory is a kind of an accurate recovery of what was there. Now, autobiography, in our discussions of autobiography, we do this. We talk about how autobiography is not necessarily an accurate representation of what had happened, isn't it? So,
but sir,
yes,
I think.
Please.
Hello.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, then actually, the next resource person has already joined.
Yes, already joined. Yes.
Okay. So let us stop here. There were quite a few questions. I don't think there is time to take it up. I once again thank KTHM College, its principal, and Department of English, especially Dr. Sharad Binnor, for giving me this opportunity. And thank you all. Have a nice time.
Thank you, sir.
Right.
And now, for proposing vote of thanks, I would like to request Professor Rathod sir, Sanjay Rathod sir. Sir, please.
Hello. Yes, can you hear me, please? Hello,
yes,
ma'am.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, sir. Good afternoon, one and all. I deem it a great honor and privilege to propose the vote of thanks for the first session of day 4 of Faculty Development Program. I would like to thank the speaker of the session, Dr. Kamalakar Bhat sir, a stalwart of literary theory, for sparing his valuable time and sharing various views on the notions like memory and cultural studies. Thank you, sir, for such a brainstorming session and offering us an intellectual feast. I would also like to express our deep gratitude to the Honorable Principal, Dr. V.B. Gaikwad sir, for his constant support in all activities. My heartfelt thanks to Professor Dr. Sharad Binnor sir and Dr. Tushar Patil sir, the true captains of the ship named Faculty Development Program. My heart goes to thank Dr. Yogeshwar and all my colleagues for their undying efforts to make the event successful one. Finally, I would like to thank all the participants for being with us and hope will remain for the next session. Thank you. Please do not leave the meeting, and the next session will, will start right now.
Yes, thank you, sir. Thank you, Sanjay sir. Naresh sir, I think Naresh sir has joined.